$50,000, Addison. You have to help. It's Hayden. My name is Addison, by the way. And that was my mother, Stephanie, dialing up the hysteria to 11, as usual. It was a Tuesday morning. I was just about to sip my first coffee before a client meeting, and already the family circus had rolled into town, demanding I play ringmaster, clown, and human ATM all at once. 50,000? I repeated, my voice flat. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. What now, Mom? Did she try to buy a small island this time? Don't be sarcastic, Addison. This is serious. She got into some trouble online, gambling. Stephanie's voice was a frantic whisper, like saying it too loudly would make it more real. Online gambling, I echoed. Right. So this wasn't like the emergency 5,000 for that photography course that turned out to be a weekend trip to Vegas with her deadbeat boyfriend, or the 10,000 for the business investment in art signal alpaca socks that evaporated faster than her sobriety at a free wine tasting. I didn't say those things. Not yet. I just let the silence hang. Stephanie filled it, her voice hitching. This is different. She's scared, Addie, really scared. She says she owes people, bad people. And I'm supposed to what? Wave a magic wand and make 50 grand appear? I kept my tone even, a skill honed over years of these calls. You have the money, Addison. You always do. You're so responsible? There it was, the backhanded compliment that always preceded the financial shakedown. The implication clear. My responsibility was not for my own life, but for theirs, for Hayden's. Responsible enough to know this is a black hole, Mom. When does it end? I asked, already knowing the answer. It never ended. It ends when her sister helps her. Stephanie's voice rose, cracking with manufactured desperation. Your father and I are coming over. We need to talk about this properly. Don't go anywhere. Click. She didn't wait for a reply. They never did. The doorbell rang less than 20 minutes later. I'd barely had time to process, or rather, to reprocess the same old story with a new higher price tag. There they were, Mom, eyes already red rimmed, dabbing at them with a tissue she'd clearly brought for dramatic effect, and Dad, Norman, looking like a man perpetually bracing for bad news, which, with Hayden around, he usually was. He offered a weak, apologetic grimace that I was supposed to interpret as solidarity, but knew was just spinelessness. Addison, thank goodness, Stephanie began, sweeping past me into my small, tidy living room, a stark contrast to the chaos she was bringing. My sanctuary, about to be violated. Dad just gave me that same weak, pleading smile and followed her, his shoulders slumped. Sit down, dear, Mom said, patting the spot next to her on my sofa as if I were the one who needed comforting. I remained standing, leaning against the door frame. It felt more defensive. So, 50,000, I said, crossing my arms. Who exactly are these bad people Hayden owes? Stephanie waved a dismissive hand as if the details were trivial. That doesn't matter. What matters is she's our daughter, your sister, and she's in trouble. Deep trouble. My sister, I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. My sister, who hasn't worked a steady job in her life. My sister, whose idea of budgeting is figuring out which of my old credit cards she can accidentally use online. My sister, who you both have enabled every single step of her disastrous way. Addison, that's not fair, Dad mumbled, finally speaking up, his voice barely above a whisper. He avoided my gaze, focusing on a spot on my rug. We just want to protect her. Protect her? I scoffed, the sound sharper than I intended. Or protect yourselves from her meltdowns when she doesn't get what she wants? Which one is it, Dad? The words were out before I could stop them. Years of this, simmering just beneath the surface, finally bubbling over. Stephanie gasped, clutching her chest as if I'd physically struck her. How can you be so cruel, so unfeeling, after everything we've done for you? Everything I've done for this family, Workyard, you mean? I shot back, my voice rising to meet hers. The down payment on this apartment? My savings? The emergency fund I set up for your leaky roof last year? My bonus? Every little loan to Hayden that was never ever repaid? Straight from my salary, the one I work 60 hours a week to earn. It's family, Addison, Stephanie said, her voice now thick with tears, real ones this time, or so it seemed. Her go to weapon. Family helps each other. It's your duty, your moral obligation. My duty to bankrupt myself for her addiction? Her irresponsibility? I could feel the familiar knot tightening in my stomach, the one that always appeared when they started in on duty and family. She made a mistake, Stephanie cried, her voice escalating. A big one, yes, but she's learned her lesson this time. I know she has. She promised. I almost laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. How many last lessons have there been, Mom? How many promises? I've lost count. We all have. This is different, she insisted, her eyes wide and pleading. She could be in real danger. These people? They aren't like the credit card companies, Addison. And whose fault is that? I asked, my voice cold. Who kept giving her a soft place to land every time she messed up, ensuring she never learned a thing? Dad stood up then, his face grim, a flicker of something I hadn't seen before desperation, maybe even fear in his eyes. Addison, your mother is right. We can't let anything happen to Hayden. You're the only one who can fix this, the only one with the means. Fix it? I stared at them, incredulous. By throwing more money at the problem, that's not fixing it. That's just postponing the next disaster, probably making it even bigger. Stephanie was openly sobbing now, the tissue a sodden mess in her hand. We don't have it, Addison. You know we don't. We've given her everything we could already. We're tapped out. You're her only hope. Our only hope. The weight of it pressed down on me, familiar and suffocating. The guilt trips, the emotional blackmail, the sheer, unadulterated expectation that I, Addison, the responsible one, the family fixer, would always be there to clean up the mess, no matter the personal cost. Stephanie pushed herself up from the sofa, her face tear streaked and blotchy, but her gaze was surprisingly steady, almost hard. She took a step towards me, her voice trembling but firm, each word a hammer blow. There's no discussion, Addison. You will pay this. She's your sister, and if you don't, you'll be tearing this family apart. You'll have her ruin on your conscience. Her ruin on my conscience, I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. Or on yours for raising a daughter who expects the world to bail her out every time she stumbles. Stephanie recoiled as if slapped. Dad just wrung his hands, his gaze fixed on the floor. Addison, please, he whispered. Just think about it. For Hayden. They left soon after, Stephanie shooting me one last look that was equal parts pleading and accusatory. The silence they left behind was heavy, thick with unspoken ultimatums. My apartment, usually my refuge, felt tainted by their desperation, their demands. The next few days were a masterclass in emotional warfare. Mom called constantly, her voice alternating between tearful begging and thinly veiled threats about my heartlessness. Dad sent short, guilt laden texts. Hayden isn't eating. She can't sleep. She's terrified, Addie. As if I were the one holding a gun to her head, not her own reckless choices. Then came Hayden herself. She showed up at my door, unannounced, of course. Her eyes were puffy, her usually vibrant blonde hair lank and unwashed. She looked genuinely wretched for about 5 minutes. Addie, she began, her voice a pathetic whimper. She even managed to squeeze out a few tears. I'm so, so sorry. I messed up. Big time. I don't know what I was thinking. I just looked at her. No, you probably don't. You rarely do when it comes to money that isn't yours. Her face crumpled. That's not fair. I was just trying to get ahead. Make something of myself. By gambling away $50,000 you didn't have? I raised an eyebrow. Whose money were you planning on getting ahead with, Hayden? Because it certainly wasn't earned. It was a bad streak, she mumbled, avoiding my eyes. I thought I could win it back. Everyone says you have to bet big to win big. Right, and now you want me to bet big on you. Again. She sniffled, dabbing at her eyes. Mom and Dad said you might help. Please, Addie, I'll pay you back. Every cent. I swear. I'm looking into this new online thing. It's like affiliate marketing. Super easy, and this guy says you can make thousands a week, practically overnight. There it was. Not even a full day into her supposed rock bottom, and already chasing the next get rich quick mirage. No remorse, just a temporary setback before the next inevitable disaster. The apology was just a performance, a necessary step to get to the part where I opened my wallet. Affiliate marketing. I said, my voice devoid of expression. Sounds promising. Her eyes lit up, mistaking my sarcasm for encouragement. Right? So, if you could just, help with this current mess, I can get started on that and then I'll be sorted. I just stared at her until her hopeful expression faltered. Get out, Hayden. But Addie, get out! She left, muttering about how I was cold and unfeeling, just like Mom always said. The door clicked shut behind her, and I let out a long, slow breath. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words online gambling echoed in my mind. I got out of bed, went to my laptop, and started typing. I wasn't looking for affiliate marketing schemes. I typed in the names of a few popular online casinos, the kind that advertise aggressively. Then I started digging deeper, looking at forums, reviews, warnings. Shady. So many of them looked utterly shady, based in countries with lax regulations, full of stories of people losing everything, of accounts being frozen, of winnings never paid out. How much had Hayden really won and then lost? Or was it all just losses, undeclared, untaxed? A new thought, cold and sharp, began to form in my mind. A way out. Not just for this 50,000, but for all of it. A way to make it stop. Permanently. The pressure from Mom and Dad didn't let up. It was a constant barrage. Have you decided, Addison? Hayden is beside herself. We're all counting on you. Finally, on Friday morning, after another sleepless night, I called Mom. Fine, I said, before she could even launch into her daily guilt trip. I'll do it. The relief in her voice was palpable, almost sickening. Oh, Addison, thank you, thank you. I knew you wouldn't let us down. I knew you had a good heart. I need Hayden's bank details for the transfer, I said, cutting through her effusive gratitude. The account where this debt needs to be paid. She rattled them off immediately, clearly having them ready. She'll be so relieved, Addie. We all will be. You're a lifesaver, truly. I hung up, feeling nothing but a dull ache. Later that day, I sat at my laptop. I logged into my online banking. My savings account, the one I'd painstakingly built for a house deposit for a future that felt increasingly out of reach, stared back at me. $50,000, a figure that made me physically ill. I typed in the amount. I entered Hayden's account details. I triple checked everything. My finger hovered over the confirm transfer button. My parents' voices echoed in my head, Hayden's crocodile tears, years of resentment churning in my gut. With a deep breath, I clicked. Your transfer of $50,000 to Hayden, account number, has been processed. A wave of nausea washed over me. My family would be celebrating right now. Mom would be crying tears of joy. Dad would be patting Hayden on the back, telling her it was all going to be okay. They'd be toasting my generosity, my sacrifice, while already forgetting the cost to me. As the confirmation screen glowed, a grim resolve settled over me. They thought this was the end of it. They were wrong. This was just the beginning. I closed the banking tab. I opened a new one. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in a different address IRS Gov. The homepage loaded. My eyes scanned the options. There it was. Report suspected tax fraud. I clicked on it. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally had enough. The online form was surprisingly straightforward. Tell us about the suspected tax fraud, it prompted. Oh, I would. I typed meticulously, carefully choosing my words. I detailed Hayden's chronic unemployment, her lack of any discernible legitimate income for years. I described her lifestyle, the designer knockoffs that weren't always knockoffs, the impromptu trips, the constant stream of new gadgets and clothes, all funded, I explained, by a combination of parental enablement and, more significantly, by large, undocumented gifts from me, her sister. The most recent gift, I typed, was for $50,000 transferred on date to cover significant gambling debts. I attached a scanned copy of my bank transfer confirmation. I also attached copies of previous smaller transfers I'd made to her over the years, the ones I'd foolishly labeled loan in the memo line, but knew I'd never see again. I framed them all as gifts because that's what they were in reality, and gifts of that magnitude I knew had tax implications for the recipient if not declared. I laid out a timeline of her financial demands, the escalating amounts, her complete lack of effort to find stable employment. I painted a picture of someone living far beyond any visible means, someone who clearly wasn't reporting her true financial situation to Uncle Sam. I made sure to mention the online gambling specifically, hinting that her winnings, if any, were certainly not being declared. Every word I typed felt like a small act of rebellion, a tiny chip at the mountain of resentment I'd carried for years. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the disrespect, the entitlement, the endless cycle of drama and bailouts. It was about reclaiming my own life, my own future from their parasitic grip. When I finally hit submit, a strange calm washed over me. It was done. The die was cast. There was a peculiar mix of dread and exhilaration churning in my stomach. Dread for the inevitable explosion, exhilaration at the thought of finally, seeing some real consequences for Hayden's actions. Life at home, or rather, life in my interactions with my family, returned to a superficial calm. Mom called, her voice syrupy sweet. Hayden is so grateful, Addison. She's really going to turn things around this time. She even bought me flowers. I bet she did. With my money. Dad sent a text. Thanks, Addie. You really came through for us. Us, not Hayden. Us. Hayden herself was conspicuously silent, probably too busy spending the leftover cash from the $50,000, assuming any was actually left after paying off her immediate debt, or perhaps already researching that affiliate marketing gold mine. A few days later, I was working from home, trying to focus on a particularly tedious spreadsheet, when I heard voices from the kitchen. Mom was over, unannounced as usual, ostensibly to drop off some Tupperware I'd lent her months ago. She and Hayden were talking, their voices low and urgent. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but my apartment wasn't that big, and their hushed tones carried an intensity that pricked my ears. Told you he wouldn't wait forever, Mom. Hayden's voice was tight with panic. That 50K was just to keep Bodie Lynch from sending someone to break my legs, or worse. Bodie Lynch? The name sent a chill down my spine. It sounded serious, not like Dave from down the pub I owe $100 to. Serious. This sounded organized crime. Serious. I know, sweetie, Stephanie soothed, her voice equally strained. But Addison came through. It's paid. He's been paid. That's what matters. But he knows I can get money, Hayden hissed. He said this was just the interest. He said the principal is still outstanding and he'll be in touch about a payment plan. What am I going to do? Addison won't give me another cent, not after this. My blood ran cold. So, the $50,000 wasn't even the full amount? It was just a down payment to a loan shark? And Mom knew? She knew Hayden was involved with someone named Bodie Lynch, someone who made threats of physical violence, and she still pressured me, guilt tripped me, emotionally blackmailed me into handing over my savings without breathing a word of this far more dangerous reality. The casual cruelty of it, the depth of their deceit, hit me with fresh force. They hadn't just been trying to save Hayden from her own stupidity, they'd been using me as a shield against something much darker, deliberately keeping me in the dark about the true extent of the danger. My resolve, already firm, hardened into something akin to granite. The following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after I'd submitted my online report, the mail arrived. I was expecting a bill, maybe a magazine. Instead, tucked amongst the junk mail, was a stark white, official looking envelope. It wasn't addressed to me, it was addressed to Ms. Hayden Summers, C.O. Ms. Addison Summers, my address. Hayden still used my address for anything important because, in her words, her own mailbox at whatever temporary place she was crashing at was unreliable, or more likely, so she could feign ignorance if anything unpleasant arrived. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was it. Hayden happened to be over that afternoon, ostensibly to borrow some milk, but more likely to see if I was still mad at her, or perhaps to subtly scope out if I was a soft touch for future loans. She was lounging on my sofa, scrolling through her phone when I walked in with the mail. Anything good? She asked, not looking up. I sorted through the pile, my expression carefully neutral. Bill, junk. Oh, this is for you. I handed her the white envelope. She took it, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. She glanced at the return address in the top left corner. Department of the Treasury, Internal Revenue Service? She read aloud, her brow furrowing. What do they want? She slid it open with her thumb, her earlier nonchalance evaporating. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, the color drained from her face. Her hand, holding the letter, began to tremble. What what is this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. Addie, what is this? What does it say? I asked, my voice calm, a stark contrast to the panic blooming on Hayden's face. I walked over to the counter, pretending to sort the rest of the mail, giving her space, but every nerve ending was attuned to her reaction. It's it's from the IRS, she stammered, her eyes darting back and forth across the page as if the words might change if she stared hard enough. They're they're saying they've received information suggesting I may have unreported income. They want records, bank statements, proof of earnings for the last 3 years. Unreported income? I feigned mild surprise. Well, that's odd. Where would they get an idea like that? Hayden's head snapped up, her eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring. Addison, did you did you say something to them? I met her gaze, my expression a carefully constructed mask of innocent concern. Me? Why would I do that, Hayden? What would I possibly tell them? I don't know, she shrieked, jumping up from the sofa, the letter crushed in her fist. But this is about the 50,000, isn't it? The money you gave me, you told them about it. I transferred money to your account, yes, I said evenly, to help you out of a jam you got yourself into. That's hardly a crime, is it? Unless, of course, you haven't been declaring your income from, well, from wherever you get your money. Her face went pale. I don't have income. Not like taxable income. It's just stuff. Gifts. You know. The IRS might have a different definition of stuff, Hayden, I said, turning to put my own mail on the kitchen island, especially when stuff amounts to tens of thousands of dollars. The doorbell rang. Speak of the devils. It was Mom and Dad arriving for their prearranged weekly dinner that I'd been trying to phase out for months. Hayden practically lunged for the door. Mom! Dad! You will not believe what Addison has done, she wailed, thrusting the crumpled IRS letter at Stephanie before they were even fully inside. Stephanie's eyes scanned the letter, her brow furrowing in confusion, then dawning horror. Norman peered over her shoulder, his usual hangdog expression deepening into actual alarm. Internal Revenue Service? Stephanie breathed, looking from the letter to me, then to Hayden. What is this, Hayden? What have you done now? Me? Hayden shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at me. It wasn't me. It was her. She reported me. I know she did. Addison? Mom turned to me, her voice trembling. Is this true? Did you report your own sister? Report her for what, Mom? I asked, keeping my tone reasonable. For receiving a gift? I simply helped her out, like you asked. If the IRS has questions about her financial affairs, that's between Hayden and them. Surely she has nothing to hide if she's been honest about her earnings, or lack thereof. But but this letter? Dad stammered, finally finding his voice. It sounds serious. They want records. We don't Hayden doesn't have records of income. Then perhaps she should have thought of that before accumulating massive gambling debts and relying on undocumented cash infusions, I said, my patience wearing thin. It's just a mistake, Stephanie said, though her voice lacked conviction. She waved the letter dismissively. A bureaucratic error. We'll call them, Hayden. We'll sort it out. They probably just got your social security number mixed up with someone else's. But Hayden wasn't listening. She was frantically pacing my small living room. Records! What records? I don't have pay stubs. I don't have W 2s. What am I supposed to give them? My losing betting slips? Her voice cracked with hysteria. The next few days were a blur of panicked phone calls between Hayden and my parents, hushed conferences I wasn't invited to, and an increasingly icy atmosphere directed towards me. They were clearly scrambling, trying to figure out how to respond to the IRS inquiry. Hayden, I gathered, was alternating between terrified paralysis and frantic attempts to invent a plausible source of income out of thin air. One evening, my friend Simone called. So, she said, her voice laced with amusement, did you push the big red button? I'd confided in Simone a few weeks ago after the initial demand for the 50,000, telling her about the IRS idea. She'd been surprisingly supportive. They've been bleeding you dry for years, Addie, she'd said. Sometimes the only way to stop a parasite is to cut off its host, or in this case, expose it to some harsh sunlight. The button has been pushed, I confirmed, a small smile playing on my lips. The package has been delivered. And? And the recipient is not pleased. Panic has officially set in. Mom and Dad are trying to pretend it's a clerical error, but they look like they've seen a ghost. Good, Simone said firmly. It's about time they all faced some real world consequences. You did the right thing, Addie. For yourself. Her words were a small comfort, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this, even if my own family was rapidly turning against me. The shift in my parents' demeanor was palpable. The saccharine gratitude was gone, replaced by suspicion and a barely concealed resentment. They still came over for dinner. Old habits die hard, and Mom probably wanted to keep an eye on me, but the conversation was stilted, punctuated by pointed questions about loyalty and family solidarity. Then, one evening, Hayden cornered me after Mom and Dad had left. Her eyes were wild, her hair a mess. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Addie, you have to help me, she pleaded, her voice raw with desperation. They want proof of where the 50,000 came from? They're asking about it specifically. I imagine they would, I said coolly. It's a large sum of money. You have to tell them it was a loan, she begged, grabbing my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. A formal loan with paperwork. We can write something up, backdate it. Please, Addie, they're asking for proof of income I don't have. If they think it was a gift, they'll tax me on it, and I don't have any money to pay taxes. You have to help me lie. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her desperate, pleading face. The face of someone who had learned nothing, who still believed the world, and specifically me, would bend to her will, would conspire to cover up her mistakes. No, Hayden, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. I will not lie for you, not anymore. I pulled my arm free. You got yourself into this mess. You can get yourself out. Hayden stared at me, her mouth agape. The desperation in her eyes slowly morphed into a furious, disbelieving glare. You you won't help me? I already helped you, Hayden, I said, my voice unwavering. I gave you $50,000. What you do with the consequences of your actions regarding that money and all the other money you've mysteriously acquired over the years is entirely up to you. But they'll ruin me, she wailed, tears starting to stream down her face. These felt more genuine than her usual performance tears. These were tears of pure, unadulterated fear. I'll owe them thousands, tens of thousands. I could go to jail. Perhaps you should have considered that before you decided to live a life funded by undeclared cash and reckless gambling, I replied, turning away from her. The sight of her distress, which once might have pricked my conscience, now only solidified my resolve. This was what needed to happen. She let out a frustrated scream and stormed out of my apartment, slamming the door so hard a picture rattled on the wall. Good. Let her storm. Let them all storm. I was done being their emotional and financial dumping ground. The next few weeks were an exercise in escalating tension. The IRS, it seemed, was not satisfied with Hayden's initial, no doubt vague and panicked responses. Another letter arrived, this one more demanding, requesting specific bank statements, transaction histories, and a detailed explanation for the large deposit, my $50,000. Mom and Hayden descended upon my apartment like a tag team of torment. Stephanie took the lead, her voice dripping with saccharine concern that barely masked a steely determination. Addison, darling, she began, perching on the edge of my sofa, Hayden hovering behind her like a sullen, resentful shadow. We need to talk about this IRS business. It's gotten rather serious. Oh? I said, feigning mild interest as I continued to type on my laptop, deliberately not giving them my full attention. Yes, Stephanie pressed on. They're asking very pointed questions about that money you gave Hayden, and, well, Hayden might have slightly misremembered how that transaction occurred when she first spoke to them. I stopped typing and looked up. Misremembered? How does one misremember receiving $50,000? Hayden piped up from behind Mom, her voice sharp with accusation. They're trying to say it was income or a gift I have to pay taxes on. It wasn't. It was an investment. I raised an eyebrow. An investment? In what, Hayden? Your uncanny ability to lose money? Stephanie shot me a quelling look before plastering on a strained smile. Now, Addison, let's not be like that. What Hayden means is, well, we were thinking perhaps that money wasn't a gift or even a loan. Perhaps it was. An investment from you in one of Hayden's ventures. I stared at them, speechless for a moment. The audacity was breathtaking. Are you seriously suggesting I invested $50,000 in one of Hayden's imaginary businesses? The artisanal alpaca socks, perhaps? Or the revolutionary new brand of air she was going to bottle? Don't be facetious, Addison, Stephanie snapped, her composure cracking. We're trying to find a solution here, a way to protect Hayden. A way to commit tax fraud, you mean? I countered. By concocting a story about a non existent business investment to deceive the IRS? That sounds like a fantastic plan. What could possibly go wrong? Hayden, emboldened by Mom's presence, stepped forward. It would explain where the money came from, and if the business failed, then there's no profit to tax. See? It works. She looked triumphant, as if she'd just solved a complex mathematical equation. It's perjury, Hayden, I said calmly, and it's incredibly stupid. Do you really think the IRS won't see right through that? Not if you back us up, Stephanie interjected, her voice rising. If you tell them it was an investment, a legitimate business arrangement that unfortunately didn't pan out, then it all makes sense. The pressure was immense. They argued, they pleaded, they cajoled, they painted vivid pictures of Hayden's ruin, of bailiffs at the door, of potential criminal charges. And through it all, the unspoken accusation hung in the air. This was my fault. If I just played along, if I just lied a little, it could all go away. Then came the argument. It was a Saturday afternoon. They'd been at it for hours, their desperation growing with each refusal I uttered. I was exhausted, my patience worn down to a nub. I don't understand you, Addison, Stephanie finally shrieked, her face flushed, her hands clenched into fists. Why are you being so deliberately obstructive, so determined to see your own sister suffer? Suffer the consequences of her own actions, you mean? I retorted, my voice tight with years of suppressed anger, something neither of you has ever allowed her to do. This isn't about her actions anymore, Stephanie cried, tears welling in her eyes. This is about you, your jealousy. You've always been jealous of Hayden, haven't you? Because she's prettier, more popular, because life comes easier to her. I actually laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Easier? Because you hand her everything on a silver platter while I work my fingers to the bone to clean up her messes? That's your definition of easier? Suddenly, Stephanie's expression shifted. The anger drained away, replaced by a look of profound, theatrical sorrow. Tears began to stream down her face. It was you, wasn't it? She whispered, her voice thick with accusation. This whole thing, it was your idea. What are you talking about? I asked, wary of this new tactic. That $50,000, she said, her voice trembling. You, you forced it on Hayden, didn't you? You told her it was for some shady business deal of yours. You were trying to use her, weren't you? To launder money or something sordid like that. And when it went wrong, when the investment failed, you decided to blame her, to throw her to the wolves to save your own skin. I stared at her, utterly dumbfounded. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it. To twist my bailout into an accusation against me? To paint me as the criminal mastermind and Hayden as my innocent pawn? It was a new low, even for them. You're actually going to stand there and accuse me of money laundering? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. It's the only thing that makes sense, Stephanie sobbed, fully committed to her performance. Why else would you be so determined to see her investigated? You're trying to deflect suspicion from yourself. Before I could even formulate a response to this outrageous accusation, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID. Unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something made me answer. Hello? Is this Miss Addison Summers? A calm, professional male voice asked. Yes, speaking. Ms. Summers, this is Agent Edwin Rose with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I'm calling regarding the financial affairs of a Ms. Hayden Summers. We've received some statements, and there are, let's just say, some serious discrepancies regarding a $50,000 transaction we'd like to clarify. We'd like to request your presence for an in person interview at your earliest convenience. My blood ran cold. Criminal Investigation Division, Stephanie and Hayden, who had been watching me with a mixture of fear and triumph, suddenly went very, very still. The air in the room crackled with unspoken dread. An in person interview? I repeated, my voice carefully neutral, though my heart was hammering. I glanced at Mom and Hayden. Their faces were ashen. Stephanie's jaw had literally dropped. Yes, ma'am, Agent Rose continued, his tone polite but firm. We believe you may have information crucial to our investigation. Would Tuesday at 10 a.m. work for you at our downtown office? Tuesday at 10 is fine, I said, already picturing the documents I'd need to gather. Will you be sending a confirmation with the address? We will. Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Summers. He hung up. The silence in my living room was deafening. Stephanie stared at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear, the theatrical tears forgotten. Hayden looked like she was about to be physically sick. Criminal Investigation Division? Stephanie finally whispered, her voice hoarse. Addison, what have you gotten us into? Me? I raised an eyebrow. I believe Hayden got herself into this, with a little help from your enabling mom, and your latest brilliant idea to accuse me of money laundering probably didn't help matters if they were listening in, though I doubt they tap the phones of ordinary citizens for routine tax inquiries that escalate due to non cooperation. That last part was a guess, but it sounded plausible. They think we're criminals, Hayden choked out, sinking onto the sofa, her bravado completely gone. Well, Hayden, I said, gathering my composure, a cold sense of purpose settling over me, lying to federal agents, which is what you were just proposing I do, is a crime. Perhaps it's time you all started taking this seriously. I spent the next few days preparing. I wasn't just gathering documents, I was arming myself. I printed out every bank statement showing transfers to Hayden, highlighting the dates and amounts. I compiled a list of her major emergencies over the years, the ones that had required substantial financial intervention from me. I even found old emails from mom and dad, pleading Hayden's case, begging me to help, inadvertently creating a paper trail of their knowledge and complicity in her financial recklessness. I was building a fortress of facts, and I intended to be unshakable. On Tuesday morning, I walked into the sterile, imposing IRS building downtown. Agent Rose was older than I expected, with a kind face that didn't quite match the steely resolve in his eyes. He led me to a small windowless interview room. Thank you for coming in, Miss Summers, he said, gesturing for me to sit. We appreciate your willingness to cooperate. I'm happy to clarify anything I can, I replied, placing my meticulously organized folder on the table between us. He started with the basics, confirming my identity, my relationship to Hayden. Then he got to the point. Ms. Summers, we're investigating discrepancies in your sister Hayden's declared income, or rather, lack thereof, over the past several years. Our attention was particularly drawn to a recent $50,000 deposit into her account. That was from me, I stated calmly. And what was the nature of this payment? Agent Rose asked, his gaze steady. It was a gift, I said, to help her with significant gambling debts she had incurred. He made a note. A gift. Your sister and your parents have provided conflicting accounts of this transaction. Initially, your sister claimed it was savings she had accumulated. Later, she, along with your mother, suggested it was an investment you made in a business venture of hers. I allowed myself a small, wry smile. Ah, yes, the business venture. I believe that was their latest attempt at creative accounting. No, Agent Rose, it was a gift, one of many I've given her over the years to bail her out of financial trouble. I have documentation if you'd like to see it. I opened my folder and laid out the bank statements, the emails. I walked him through the history, calmly and factually, detailing the pattern of Hayden's irresponsibility and my family's relentless pressure on me to be her perpetual safety net. I didn't editorialize, I let the facts speak for themselves. Agent Rose listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. He examined the documents I provided with a keen eye. He seemed particularly interested in the emails from my parents. This paints a rather different picture, Ms. Summers, he said after a while, leaning back in his chair. A much more consistent one, I might add, than what we've heard so far from your family. I imagine it does, I replied. He then asked about Hayden's lifestyle, her spending habits, any known sources of income. I told him what I knew, which was mostly a lack of any legitimate work. I didn't mention Bodie Lynch by name. I didn't need to. The gambling debts and lack of declared income were enough. Let them uncover that particular viper's nest on their own if Hayden was foolish enough to bring it up, or if their investigation led them there. My goal was to sever my financial ties and see Hayden face consequences for her tax obligations, not to get her kneecapped. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours. When it was over, Agent Rose shook my hand. Thank you, Ms. Summers. Your testimony has been very helpful. I walked out of that building feeling lighter than I had in years. I had told my truth, backed it up with evidence, and it felt good. Later that week, I heard through the family grapevine, which was now more of a choked vine, given the circumstances, that Hayden, Stephanie, and Norman had all been called in for individual interviews as well. I could only imagine the contradictory, panicked stories they must have told. Norman, I heard from a reluctant aunt who called to check in, pump me for information, had apparently become very withdrawn and was barely speaking to anyone. The pressure was clearly getting to him. A few days after their interviews, my phone rang. It was Agent Rose. Ms. Summers, he began, his voice professional but with an undertone I couldn't quite decipher. I'm calling to follow up on our conversation and the subsequent interviews with your family members. Yes, I said, bracing myself. Based on your testimony, the documentation you provided, and the significant, frankly irreconcilable inconsistencies from your sister and parents, we are proceeding with a full audit of Ms. Hayden Summers' finances for the past 3 fiscal years. We will also be assessing substantial penalties against her for failure to declare income and for the undeclared $50,000 gift. My breath caught in my throat. It was happening. Furthermore, Agent Rose continued, his voice hardening slightly, given the attempts to mislead IRS investigators with fabricated stories about business investments, we may also need to look into potential charges of obstruction and making false statements against your parents, Stephanie and Norman. Their attempts to cover for your sister have put them in a precarious legal position. Obstruction, false statements against mom and dad. The net wasn't just closing on Hayden, it was widening to ensnare them all. A cold wave washed over me, a mixture of grim satisfaction and a surprising, faint tremor of something else. Pity? No, just the stark realization of the magnitude of what I had set in motion. The official determination letter arrived about a month later, not at my address this time. It went directly to Hayden, presumably at mom and dad's, where she'd officially taken up residence again, a cuckoo in their rapidly emptying nest. The fallout was instantaneous. My phone exploded with calls from mom, each one more hysterical than the last. I let them go to voicemail. Then came the texts, a barrage of furious, misspelled accusations. Finally, they showed up at my door. All three of them. I knew it was coming. I'd been steeling myself for it. I opened the door to a tableau of utter devastation and fury. Hayden was a wreck, her face blotchy and swollen from crying, clutching a sheaf of official looking papers. Stephanie looked like a woman possessed, her eyes blazing with a terrifying maternal rage. Norman just looked broken, aged 10 years in a few short weeks, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of weary defeat. You? Stephanie shrieked the moment she saw me, lunging forward. Norman instinctively put a hand on her arm, holding her back, though it looked like it took all his strength. You did this! You ruined us! Ruined you? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. I stepped back, allowing them into my apartment. If this was going to be the final showdown, let it happen on my turf. Or did you finally face the bill for years of deceit and irresponsibility? They're saying I owe them over $100,000, Hayden wailed, thrusting the papers at me. Back taxes, penalties, interest. They're talking about seizing assets. What assets? I don't have any assets thanks to you taking back that 50,000. I didn't take it back, Hayden, I said, not even glancing at the papers. I gave it to you. The IRS is merely pointing out that you should have declared it, along with all the other gifts and undeclared income you've been living on for years. And now they're adding fines for lying to them. You set me up, she screamed, tears streaming down her face. You knew this would happen. You wanted this. Yes, Hayden, I said, my voice cold and clear. I did. I wanted you to finally understand that actions have consequences, a lesson mom and dad clearly failed to teach you. That was Stephanie's cue. How dare you? She spat, her voice trembling with rage. How dare you speak about us like that? We gave you everything. You gave me nothing. I didn't earn myself. I shot back, the years of suppressed anger finally erupting. What you gave Hayden was a free pass to be a leech. You enabled her, coddled her, protected her from every mistake, ensuring she grew into a 30-year-old child incapable of taking responsibility for anything. She's your sister, Norman finally croaked, his voice raspy. Family is supposed to protect each other. Protect? Or destroy from within? I countered, turning on him. You stood by and watched her bleed me dry for years, Dad. You let Mom manipulate me, guilt me into funding Hayden's endless disasters. Where was your protection for me? Your responsible daughter, the one who actually paid her taxes, held down a job, and tried to build a life only to have it constantly undermined by your collective dysfunction. The words poured out of me, a torrent of grievances I'd held back for too long. I listed every major bailout, every sacrifice I'd made, every lie they'd told to cover for Hayden, every time they'd chosen her wants over my needs. Hayden was sobbing openly now, a crumpled heap on my sofa. Norman sank into a chair, his head in his hands. But Stephanie, oh, Stephanie was far from done. You think you're so perfect, don't you, Addison? She sneered, her face contorted with malice. So high and mighty. Well, let me tell you something about family and sacrifice. We sacrificed too, more than you'll ever know. Sacrificed what? I scoffed. My future? My sanity? Our home! She shrieked, her voice cracking. We took out a second mortgage on our house years ago. Years! To pay off another one of Hayden's messes. A huge one, with that Bodie Lynch. The name hung in the air, heavy and venomous. My blood ran cold. So, the 50,000 I'd given them for Hayden's current Bodie Lynch problem wasn't even the first time he'd been in the picture. Stephanie was hysterical now, the confession tumbling out in a torrent of tears and self pity. We couldn't tell you. Hayden begged us not to. She was terrified. He was threatening her, threatening us. We've been drowning in that debt for years, barely keeping our heads above water. That 50,000 you gave us, yes, some of it was for Hayden's new gambling hole, but the rest was to make a payment on that secret mortgage, a payment we couldn't make anymore. We were about to lose everything. The room fell silent, save for Stephanie's ragged sobs. The truth, in all its ugly, pathetic glory, was finally out. Their extreme pressure, their desperate lies, their willingness to throw me under the bus, it wasn't just about protecting Hayden this time. It was about saving themselves from a ruin of their own making, a ruin orchestrated by their inability to ever say no to their favored, reckless daughter. I looked at them, Hayden, a blubbering mess, Norman, a broken shell of a man, Stephanie, exposed and unraveling. There was no triumph in that moment, just a vast, empty weariness. The revenge was complete, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the sheer depth of their dysfunction. So, all this time, I said, my voice barely a whisper, all this drama, all this pressure on me, it was to cover up your own financial incompetence, your own secrets. Stephanie just wept. Norman didn't look up. I picked up my keys from the counter. I think it's time for you all to leave, I said, my voice devoid of inflection. Hayden looked up, her face a mask of tear streaked fury. You think you've won? She screamed, her voice hoarse. You'll be miserable and alone forever, Addison. You'll regret this. You'll see. No one will ever love someone as cold and cruel as you. I didn't answer. I just opened the door and waited. Slowly, defeated, they shuffled out, leaving behind them the wreckage of what was once, by name only, a family. As the door clicked shut, Hayden's parting words echoed in the sudden, profound silence of my apartment. Miserable and alone. Maybe. But for the first time in my adult life, I was also free. The silence that descended after they left wasn't just the absence of their voices, it was the absence of expectation, of obligation, of the constant gnawing weight of their problems. I changed the locks the next day. I blocked their numbers. I set up email filters that sent anything from their addresses directly to a folder I named Oblivion. It felt like performing an exorcism on my own life. Simone called a few days after the big blowup, having heard a garbled third hand account from a mutual acquaintance who'd gotten an earful from a distraught Stephanie. So, Simone said, her voice cautious, the mushroom cloud has settled? You could say that, I replied, swirling the wine in my glass. I was sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was peaceful. The city's still standing mostly. My part of it, anyway. And them? Last I heard, Hayden was trying to declare bankruptcy, but the IRS isn't exactly sympathetic to oops, I forgot to declare hundreds of thousands in gifts and gambling proceeds and then lied about it. Mom and dad are apparently scrambling to deal with the second mortgage fallout and the distinct possibility of those obstruction charges Agent Rose mentioned. Their social circle has suddenly become very small. Karma's a patient accountant, isn't she? Simone mused. Takes her time, but her ledger's always balance. Indeed, I said, taking a sip of wine, and her interest rates are brutal. Life settled into a new rhythm, a quiet rhythm. At first, the silence was jarring. I'd catch myself bracing for a frantic call, a tearful demand, a manufactured crisis. But the phone remained quiet. My email inbox was blessedly free of their drama. The knot in my stomach, the one that had been a permanent resident for as long as I could remember, slowly began to unwind. I started investing in myself, literally and figuratively. The money I was no longer pouring into the black hole of my family's irresponsibility went into a proper investment account. I enrolled in a pottery class I'd always wanted to try. I started hiking on weekends, exploring trails, breathing fresh air, clearing my head. One Saturday, about a season after the final confrontation, a thin, plain envelope arrived. No return address, but I recognized Dad's spidery handwriting. My first instinct was to toss it into the oblivion folder, unread. But curiosity, or perhaps a lingering sliver of something I couldn't quite name, made me open it. It was short, just a few lines. Addison, it read, I know this won't change anything, but I am sorry for my part in it all, for not being a better father, for not protecting you. We are dealing with the consequences. I hope someday you find happiness. Norman. I read it twice. It wasn't an apology designed to reel me back in. There were no excuses, no deflections, no guilt trips. Just a simple, stark admission. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Acknowledging his pain wouldn't lessen mine, nor would it magically repair the years of damage. But it was a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. The news about Bodie Lynch trickled through eventually, not from my family, but from a news clipping. Simone forwarded me a small article about a crackdown on illegal lending operations. His name was mentioned, no details about Hayden's involvement, thankfully for her, but it was clear his enterprise was being dismantled. Whether he ever came looking for Hayden's outstanding principal, I didn't know, and frankly, didn't care. That was her storm to weather. I saw Hayden once, unexpectedly. I was in a discount department store looking for new towels. She was behind a checkout counter, wearing an ill fitting store vest, her usually vibrant hair dull, her nails unmanicured. She looked tired, worn down. Our eyes met for a fleeting second, a flicker of recognition, then shame crossed her face before she quickly looked away, focusing intently on scanning a customer's items. I paid for my towels at a different register and left. There was no satisfaction in seeing her like that, just a quiet affirmation that choices have cost. Sometimes, late at night, when the city outside my window was hushed, Hayden's final words would echo faintly. You'll be miserable and alone forever. Was I alone? Yes, in a way. The family I had known was gone, shattered by their own hands with a final push from mine. But miserable? No. I looked around my small, tidy apartment. My pottery attempts, lopsided but colorful, sat on a shelf. Photos from my hiking trips were pinned to a corkboard. My finances were stable, my future my own to design. The quiet in my life wasn't emptiness, it was space. Space to breathe, to grow, to build something new, something just for me. They called me the architect of their consequences. They were right. It was a heavy blueprint to draw and an even heavier one to build. But for the first time, my own house felt stable, built on foundations they could no longer shake. The silence in my life wasn't empty. It was the sound of freedom. And it was, in its own way, profoundly, deeply satisfying.